All right, welcome to lesson 4 for chapter 7. It's going to be on population growth and standard of living. Learning objective is that you'll be able to describe how different standards of living influence human population growth rates, because humans have different, some different rules and things that are influencing our population growth rate that we're not seeing in nature. So the different factors that influence human population growth. Humans, unlike other organisms, are influenced by social, political, economic, and ethical factors. We can make conscious decisions based on the likely course of events and adjust our lives accordingly, planning for the future in a way that other organisms are not able to. So we're going to go over different types of factors. We're going to start with the biological factors. So to talk about the biological factors, I want to define demography, and that's the study of populations and their characteristics, how those characteristics affect growth, and then the consequences of that growth, usually in terms of human populations. So in this, we're looking at the balance between the birth rate and the death rate, and that has a large influence on population growth. High birth rate and low deaths result in a large population growth. If you're having a lot of babies that people are not, passing, then our population is just going to explode. And the age distribution of a population influences population growth as well. If there's a high proportion of young people, that's going to be higher birth rates. If there's a lot of people in that age range that is reproducing and having babies, then population is going to grow faster. And zero population growth is super, super rare, but that is when birth rate equals death rate. So there is no population growth actually happening because the same amount of individuals are being born that are dying. So to continue with biological factors, the most important determinant of the rate at which human populations grow is related to how many women in the population are having children and the number of children each woman will have. This is a biological factor that can be influenced by social and cultural things, like how many children a culture expects or wants, the economic standing of women, which we'll talk about later. But the total fertility rate of a population is the number of children that a woman has in her lifetime. So it's the average for all women. When there's a total fertility rate of 2.1, so on average, everyone is having about 2 children, and it's just slightly more than 2 children because not every child that a woman has will either make it to reproductive age or will have children, is known as replacement fertility. So we're just replacing the parents who had the 2 children. That would lead to zero population growth. All right, moving on from biological factors onto social factors. So reducing fertility rates would be advantageous, especially in less developed countries, but not everyone agrees. So again, fertility rates, it's not just like, how fertile are the people, but it kind of is. It's how many babies they are having. Several factors, like I said, religious, tradition, social, and economic, influence the number of children a couple would like to have. And the major social factors determining family size are the status and desires of women in the culture. So how economically, what economic advantages they have, what's their education possibilities, all of those affect how many babies a woman has. So in cultures that are male dominated, typically, not always, but typically the traditional role of the woman is to marry and raise children. And so their population growth rate or fertility rate might be higher because that is a woman's expectation, is to have those children and raise them. Early marriages are common in those male-dominated cultures, and that usually will lead to higher fertility rates. Women are exposed to a high likelihood of pregnancy for longer. And child-rearing practices also can influence population growth rates. So in countries where breastfeeding is practiced, several benefits accrue. One, it's an excellent source of nutrients and antibodies, but also when a woman is breastfeeding, she is less likely to become pregnant again. It is not like a never, can't happen. It just is less likely that it would happen. I mentioned education before, but a lack of education opportunities for women reduces their options. When level of education increases, fertility rates fall, and there is data that supports this. So the more education opportunities that a woman has, the less likely she is to marry very young and spend her whole life, having and raising children. If there's financial independence, so they can get a good education, they can get a job, they can support themselves, that means that they are more likely to marry later in life. Better educated women are also more likely to have access to and use birth control. And then in some women and some cultures, even if education and economic stability is available for women, some just still desire to have large families. Especially in countries where infant mortality is high, it's tradition to have large families since several of the women's children may not live to adulthood. It's also common in these cultures for the children to take care of the parents as they get older. So for the parents' care in the future, they want to make sure they have a lot of children to help take care of them. Parents are more secure when there are many children to look after their own needs in old age. All right, so here are some graphs showing that. So female literacy and fertility, here's total fertility rate and then female literacy. So fertility rate's how many babies women are having on average. So the lower the female literacy, the higher that fertility. So they're having more babies. And then as that literacy increases, we see less babies. Early marriage and births. So the gold is women 15 to 19 that are married, and the pink is women 15 to 19 giving birth in a year. So the more that are married in that country or continent, then the more percent of them that are having babies. Like we can see that those are pretty influenced by each other. And then female literacy and economic well-being. So instead of looking at how many babies we're having, we're looking at how much money they're making in a year. So as female literacy goes up, so does their income. And then early marriage and total fertility rate. As more women are getting married early, they're having more babies. All right, moving on from social on to economic factors. So in less developed countries, the economic benefits of children are extremely important. Even young children can be given jobs that contribute to the family economies, such as protecting livestock, gathering firewood, or carrying water. And this is in less developed countries, so not like in the U.S. In the U.S., which would be a developed world, large numbers of children are an economic drain. They cost a lot of money. They typically cannot work until the age of 16. There are some exceptions, but you're not putting them to work, immediately. It's a requirement that they are sent to school. School costs money typically. So even if you're not paying for the schooling, you're paying for the school supplies. So they consume large amounts of the family income. So you're not having children, so they can help raise money and support the farm and do all the things. You're having children to have children, and they cost money. So people tend to have less. And then for political factors, governments can either reward or punish high fertility rates. So if a country wants people to have more babies, then they would reward it. If their population is getting a little out of control, then they would want to push it down a little bit. So several European countries are concerned about low birth rates and have instituted policies to encourage couples to have more children. So they have really good paid maternity leave, guaranteed job availability upon the mother's return to work. Childcare facilities make it possible for both parents to work, and in some countries, those childcare facilities are paid for. And then child tax deductions provide an indirect payment to families so that they get some of that money back of what a child costs. Most developing countries are concerned that the population growth is too rapid, and they have instituted programs to limit growth. They provide information on family planning and maternal and child health. The more access women have to birth control, the less likely that population, they're going to have a ton of babies. Sometimes governments provide free or low-cost contraceptives. And then in China, one big example for over 30 years, from 1980 to 2016, they had a one-child policy where each couple could only have one child. That ended about 8 or 9 years ago. All right, so you can pause and take a gander at this guy, but this is population characteristics of the 10 most populous countries in 2013. So you can see the current population, the death rate, or the birth rate, the death rate, total fertility, and then what percentage of the population is less than 15 years old. If this is really high, then we would expect that population to increase in the coming years. So Nigeria has a really high population change, and you can see at the bottom it says projected population change for Nigeria is 43%. So that's huge. The other thing we're going to talk about that influences human population growth is going to be immigration policies. So birth rates, death rates, that is controlled within that population, but immigration and emigration are people moving into and out of a population that also influences population size. So in some countries, birth rates are so low that immigration is encouraged to offset a potential decline in the number of working age citizens. They want to keep a population stable so that there's still people to do all of the jobs. So if they think their own population is not going to increase or not going to stay the same, then they may push for immigration. Developed countries are under intense pressure to accept immigrants, and the higher standard of living is a magnet for refugees and people who seek a better life than is possible where they currently live. So there appears to be an inverse relationship between a country's growth rate and its average standard of living. That means if the standard of living is high, then the growth rate is going to be low. If the standard of living is low, then the growth rate tends to be high. So they're opposites. And standard of living is a difficult concept to quantify since various cultures have different desires. Factors usually include economic well-being, health conditions, social status, and mobility. So let's look at some trends. So if we look at total fertility rate, and the three we're looking at is United States, Peru, and then Kenya. Total fertility rate, United States is the lowest, with the other two increasing. Per capita GNI, which we're going to define on the next slide, is way higher in the US than in the other two. Average years of education, life expectancy, and then infant mortality as well. So we see a really low infant mortality in the US and then a slightly lower fertility rate because people are less concerned about their children passing. So an important economic measure of standard of living is the average purchasing power per person. So how much money does a person have to, use? So gross national income is GNI. It's an index of purchasing power measured by total goods and services generated by the citizens of a country. So what goods and services does that country have to offer? And then gross national income purchasing power parity, GNI-PPP, is used to account for varying prices of goods and services between countries. All right, that was a big one. That is the last slide of this lesson. Please let me know if you have any questions, and I will see you in the next.